Recording in progress.
So let's do the 4 limitless contemplations. May all beings have happiness and create the causes of happiness. May they all be free from suffering and creating the causes of suffering. May they find that noble happiness which can never be tainted by suffering. May they attain universal impartial compassion, free of worldly bias towards friends and enemies. Sem jen tam che dewa tang dewe ju tang den pa ju chik dungal tang dungal che chu tang trao wa ju chik dungal me pe dewa tampa tang mindra wa ju chik ne ring chak tang ni tang trao we tang nom chempo la ne pa ju chik. So everybody, so tonight we're going to really look a lot deeper into the application of Buddhism to Western psychology. And a lot of people are really, texting me and saying how interested they are in this whole subject matter, which is really important. But it's funny because maybe I always want to do the teachings that jump over the river. And I think most people want the teachings that take you along the little bricks that cross the river one at a time. Mart, you once said to me, you're on an express train and I'm on the slow boat or whatever. But, I think that we can do both, and I think that that's very nice. Please put your cameras on so I can see you if you can, because it's much nicer for me, especially in my new shrine room. So I'm going to start off with a lovely story someone sent me, and it goes like this. A water bearer in India had 2 large pots, each hung on the ends of a pole which he carried across his neck. One of the pots had a crack in it, while the other pot was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water to the house. The cracked pot arrived only half full. Hello, Pam. For a full 2 years, this went on daily, with the bearer delivering only 1.5 pots full of water to his house. Of course, the perfect pot was proud of its accomplishment, perfect for which it was made. But the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfection and miserable that it was only able to accomplish only half of what it was made to do. What it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be a bitter failure, it spoke to the water bearer one day by the stream. I am ashamed of myself, said the pot, and I want to apologize to you. I've been able to deliver only half my load because this crack in my side caused water to leak all the way back to your house. The bearer said to the pot, did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of the pot, but not on the other pot side? That's because I've always known about your flaw, and I planted flower seeds on your side on the path, and every day while we walk back, you've watered them. For 2 years, I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate the table. Without you being just the way you are, there would not be this beauty to grace the house. So then at the end it gives the moral of the story. Each of us has our own unique flaws. We're all cracked pots, but it's the cracks and the flaws we have that make our lives very interesting and rewarding. You've got to take each person for what they are and look for the good in them. And then this person who sent blessings to all my crackpot friends. Okay, so I think it's a beautiful story because I think that in our world we really have a lot of perfection that people want for themselves. You want everything to be perfect in your life. You want to be perfect. And that's not the idea of being a human being. You're not supposed to be 100% perfect. You're supposed to have flaws. And tonight we're going to look at what Jung spoke about as the shadow part of us and see how Buddhism can actually help us to integrate the shadow parts of our lives. And then I had a beautiful cartoon which I sent to her, but you can't see it. It was from Buddhism with sheep, and the sheep is standing in front of the shop, looking at the lamb chops. It's a special offer of lamb chops, and underneath it says, "It is necessary to gain the insight that life is impermanent." The poor little sheep is looking at his chops in the window, okay? And it's necessary, but she didn't come tonight. So it's been quite a long break with me moving, but I feel the subject matter is so vital to facing ourselves with full awareness, and I have no problem if you butt in at all tonight. We've got to be able to see the true purpose of what we're actually doing here. Otherwise, what are we doing here? Things like how I came to this life, why these circumstances, what exactly are my habit momentum imprints that I truly need to clear? Am I resentful about what's happened to me? Do I ever feel like a victim in my circumstances? And on and on. So because it's been quite a long gap, I'd really like to summarize what we did in the last 2 weeks, because this is part 3, and what we did, I really would like to summarize for you so you can all remember. So let's just start. And Avril and Lily, I really loved seeing you, so put your camera on. So let's start with a summary of the consciousnesses that we were talking about, okay? Because I told you that I had this morning vision and that the consciousnesses went onto different levels, but actually if you look at the levels, it's actually deeper and deeper. But just for purposes of our minds, we make it up and up so that we can understand it. But actually, it's deeper consciousness and deeper consciousness. So what we were talking about is when the stage opened on the curtains, there is the human psyche, the human part of us with its drama, with all its things going on. So on the stage are all the props, and in front are all the beings walking around on the prop, going through their lives, okay? And that human consciousness, that psyche, is our shallowest state, you could say. It's not our deepest state. It's how we live. Oh, okay. It's how we live and how we look at our lives. But it is so limited. And then when you go to the next level of our consciousness, you can either see it down or up. But the next level is the alaya or the substrate consciousness that we were talking about, okay? The alaya and the substrate consciousness, and the either or with those numbers. And those two are really, really important, the alaya or the substrate consciousness, because that is where it's like that part of our consciousness is like a memory chip, okay? It's like a computer memory chip. All the karmic imprints of our own creation are in that level of the alaya and the substrate consciousness. And they are our own creations. Whatever's happening on the stage of life is because of what has been created and stored in the alaya consciousness. So these two interact, especially in dreaming. And what I wanted to do, I thought, was to talk tonight about the shadow and about a lot of the aspects of the psychology. But then when I'm finished doing this, I want to go on to the dreams as dreaming relates to Buddhism versus psychology, because I think you'll all find that very, very interesting to go straight on. A lot of you know a lot about the dreams, and I've done a lot, but I think that it fits very, very well here to do the dreams afterwards. So the second level is your alaya or your substrate consciousness, where you've created all your karmic imprints. And they have a bearing on what is happening on the psyche, the stage of life. They have a bearing on what is happening, because everything are these two interacting with each other. So you can never say, why is this happening to me? What's going on with me? You have to realize that it is your creation. No punishing God, no punishing deities. It's your creation that interacts with what you're doing in your life. And then finally, if you go to the deep level of the consciousness, or if you want to look at it right at the top, it doesn't matter, either or. But the deepest level is your primordial consciousness. And once you actually touch that primordial consciousness, all of these other levels of your consciousness falls away. But that doesn't mean you're not responsible for that, what happens in those karmic imprints. You are still responsible, and you have to play it out. But once you are in the primordial consciousness, all of this is just temporary, transient dramas, and you can butt in if you want to talk. I want you really to understand this about your own lives. It's so important, because the primordial consciousness consists of, first of all, the pure state of your being, which is open, essence, emptiness, blue, if you want to call it. And that actually manifests in a very, very pure way. But how it manifests is in the 3 kayas and the 5 wisdoms. That's its pure manifestation. But even so, even in the pure manifestation, it's all temporary, transient, and then goes back into the essence, always. So it's really important for you to understand that when you're going through a really hard and rough journey, that the most important thing for you is to keep aligning yourself with that primordial consciousness, with that Buddha essence, with that being that is your own real being. This is the drama on the stage of life as I went. And those of you that missed that session can go back and really listen to it. But if you understand those 3 levels of consciousness, it's absolutely amazing, because suddenly you view your life from a completely different level. And when you die, all the levels of human consciousness die. They're gone, except for the alaya consciousness, or the substrate, which carries your imprints. So it is so important, while you are acting out this life, and I'm using that word, while you are acting out this temporary drama, it is absolutely vital that you clear that alaya consciousness so that you can go straight after death into your primordial consciousness. And it's so interesting what I was saying, and you can go back to the teaching, that when you die, it starts the opposite way, because when you first die, you're exposed to your primordial consciousness, your pure state. But most people don't recognize that, know. So then it goes to the expression of the essence, what I've just been saying, the wisdoms, the 5 wisdoms and all the families, the pure expression. Now, lots of people get really scared when they see those colors, those sounds, those rays. They really, really get scared. And if not, then you back into the 3rd bardo with the with all your karmic imprints. Unbelievable. So it goes the opposite way. You first have the opportunity, open portal to unity, to see who you are. And then you have, straight from that, you go to see the expression. If you can't recognize either, then you back into that human psyche again. And you've got to look at all your imprints, all the things that you've done, how you've lived your life and everything. And if you're scared, which I go a lot in my sleep state and see people who've died. And if you're scared, when you see especially your repetitive imprints, then you just want to duck. And what happens when you duck? Can you duck? Yes, you can duck. But then when you duck, you take that consciousness with you. So then you are catapulted into parents or situations, no parents or ugly parents or abusive parents or not loving parents, that fulfill your own creations. So it's vital, this. I don't know who Jim is. I haven't seen you before, but lovely if you put your camera on, all of you. I like to see your faces. So anyone want to say anything? That was in the first or second session that we did. Hi, Jim. Nice to see you. Anyone want to ask anything or say anything? Sure. You just want me to go blah, 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 on and on. Okay, if you want to. So then after that, we spoke about the Four Noble Truths. But everybody who ever reads about Buddhism knows about the Four Noble Truths. But how do you read those Four Noble Truths? Because when the Buddha taught them, he taught them with a purpose. He said, life is suffering. Life, the way you are leading it, is suffering. Then he said, here are the causes. Your negative emotions and your karmic imprints that I've just spoken about are the causes of your suffering. Nothing else. No one gave them to you. You created them. Thirdly, he said, there is a place where suffering stops. Don't we want to find that? And then when he said there is a place where suffering stops, that is actually going into your primordial consciousness, learning how to get in touch with it. And lastly, he said, here's a path I give you to learn, to go and to be able to go to your primordial consciousness. But that's what he taught in the first turning. You can go back to the talk I gave. I'm not going into too much detail. The second turning, he said, life is suffering and you need to understand it, okay? This is the causes and you need to understand them, etc. The third time, the third turning of the wheel was when he gave it to the people that could really, really understand. And he said, life is suffering. You must understand what the suffering is, but actually there's nothing to understand. Nothing to understand. And that was for the people who could really, really understand that there's no solidity. Anyone got their thing off? I don't know. Phil, just mute yourself so your sound doesn't come through. Just mute yourself. So when he said, but there's nothing there, he was teaching everything in this world is just interdependent causes. Nothing stands alone by itself. So actually, there is no thing that is tangible. It's empty. But he only gave that teaching to very few people because most people couldn't understand it. They could only understand this happened because of this, this happened because of this, but in the end there really was nothing. So that was part of what we did with the Buddhism so we could understand the Western psychology. So I want to go on a little bit. We talked a little bit about Rob Priest's individuality versus individuation. Hi, Jim's wife, partner, I don't know. So I like it when I see new faces. It's good that you're both there. You'll tell me afterwards where you've come from. Okay, so individuality versus Jung's idea of individuation. Now, what were those two? Okay, Rob Priest said he wanted to reconcile two worldviews that he loved, Buddhism and Jung. He wanted to reconcile those two. I started talking about it, but since we've had a long break, I'm going again. He saw many common elements in Buddhism and what Jung taught, but also many areas where Westerners have psychological problems or wounding that isn't really found with Eastern people because they don't have the same psychology as we do, and difficult for many of the Eastern teachers to relate to. They relate a little bit later to all our nonsense and all our stuff that we've got. So we need to find a way of seeing how Buddhist insights and practice influence and enable our psychological journey. How can we take what we're learning and put it into Western psychology? It's a difficult thing, but amazing when you actually get it. It really is. So he said also how the process of psychological individuation, which I'm going to define for you in a moment, as described by thinkers like Jung, is actually reflected in the Buddhist path. To individuate is to bring into being our real inner nature, okay, and to manifest in this in our life as an individual. It's not called Buddha nature in Jungian philosophy, but it actually is your Buddha nature, your real awakened nature. Individuation implies becoming ever more conscious of and fully open to all that we are, if it's good or bad, so that we can become increasingly whole. We can value our individual qualities and potentials along with our human frailty and fallibility. Not called individuation, Buddhist understanding offers a path of practice that profoundly supports this process. Buddha's life, his own life, demonstrated exactly this, a gradual self-transformation and self-realization, the awakening of his innate true nature. Okay, now I think Jung knew this fully, but he couldn't come across, he couldn't say this in his day because, you know, he had all these absolute scientific psychiatrists and everything on his back, so he couldn't really say that. But I told you last time, he wrote the foreword to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So he really understood all of these things Jung did. But what we have to understand is that Buddha Shakyamuni was already awakened, but he came to take this journey of individuation, if you want to call it, in order to teach us how to do it. But those of you who really understand can take a leap. You don't have to go through all the individual stages, especially if you've done it before, okay? But the spiritual psychological journey, I'm going to throw it open in a minute, isn't easy. We often distort our understanding of Buddhism to suit the personal inclinations. And we do this to maintain and justify our habits and beliefs that secure a familiar sense of identity in the world. In other words, we take all our neuroses and we put them into life. And then when we learn a spiritual path like Buddhism, we like justify the things that we do, you know, our own neuroses. Because people sometimes say to me, which is quite interesting, they say to me, Melanie, I don't have your devotion and your discipline. And then I ask them, what does that mean? What are you saying to me when you say you don't have my discipline and my devotion? Maybe it might be more truthful to say, I want a quick fix. I'm a bit lazy, or, you know, I'd rather be a couch potato and watch television rather than do my Buddhist practice, okay? We have to be, or I don't feel I have the ability, or I doubt myself. We have to be absolutely honest. And tonight I'm going to talk about Jung's shadow because it fits so beautifully into the Buddhism. And Chogyam Trungpa, in his book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, spoke about a kind of supermarket mentality to Buddhism. He said, Westerners go and they want quick and easy solutions. They want a little bit of this and a little bit of that. They just want to get enlightened, but they don't want to go through the whole journey from the beginning. And we'll talk about the shadow in a minute. So now how the Buddha taught thousands and thousands of practices to suit the needs of every individual. But we have to really be careful not to take bits and pieces of practices. It's okay to just do mantras and mantra chanting and things like that. if you look at the way the Buddhist practices are given to us, they're given to us so that we can resolve that psychology and take ourselves away from that temporary individual, me as Melanie in my little life going through my little temporary drama is one grain in the sandpit. We are so much more than that. And so the practices are to say, for instance, when you do the deity practices, it's to give you the qualities of what you really are in your awakened nature, which is really important. So I think that the practices give us the real light bulb. And when people say to me, I don't want to do Vajrayana practice, I can't understand it in Tibetan, do it in English. Who cares if you do it in your own language? It's really fine. But don't forget that every practice of the 84,000 that Buddha gave are for taking us one step further to recognizing, re-knowing our awakened or our Buddha natures. And when you look deeply, they take us away from that little self-centered, egocentric orientation so that we can be free of suffering. Everybody wants to be free of suffering, but nobody wants to do the work to gain the recognition and the insight to know. It's really important, And to get there, we need to become aware of our shadow, what Jung called the shadow. That is the dark parts of ourselves. We need to know them, which if we looked again, could be transformed or seen in their pure wisdom natures. They always were pure, but we can't see it. And we need an alchemy process to get there. In learning to have compassion, we have to have it towards ourselves. So like I wrote this down, you talking to yourself. So this is you talking to yourself or me talking to myself. You say to yourself, okay, I know you have a deep insecurity about abandonment because your mom wasn't able to be there for you. Bring this out. You're talking to yourself. But you are worth loving truly. And let's open the curtain to the second stage of your consciousness, the karmic memory chip, taking responsibility for our self-created situations. So it's not that you didn't have a loving mommy because you are not a loving person. You didn't have a loving mommy because somewhere you weren't a loving mommy or you weren't a loving parent or whatever happened. And now you have to come back to find it. So if you didn't resolve that, then back you come in. And then you find yourself with this particular parent who seems all wrong, but who's all right for your karmic chips, your memory chip. Absolutely right situation. And as soon as you get this, the resentment for her, all the old stuff just dissolves. Because you realize I'm in the right place at the right time, and now I need to work through this. It's really important. You're nodding, Kath. So it's really important you have compassion to yourself and you move through it. And you take responsibility for this difficult, even traumatic event. But this is a temporary, transient drama, okay? And this is the whole part of me. There's a whole part of me that isn't tainted by this at all. Okay, it's not tainted. There's a part of me that isn't tainted by this at all. So when we examine Rob Priest's individuality versus individuation, I'm going to give you some main points. Firstly, he said, as we know, in Western self-expression, individuality and creativity are generally rewarded and applauded. So interesting, because in Eastern culture, It's not. It's becoming like that, but it's not the same way, because in Eastern culture, as he talks about, you need a lineage. You need to identify yourself with that lineage. But in the West, the more unique you are, the more individualistic you are, the more you get rewarded. You don't get rewarded for following any patterns, okay? And he says we need to be psychologically robust to cope with a hostile, competitive environment and an insecure world. So individuality has positive and negative consequences. What are the positive? It has the capacity for self-sufficiency, self-reliance, but if you're going on an individual path and there's a lot of ego grasping there, then it might engender insecurity, self-preoccupation, competitiveness, narcissism, and the need to prove yourself. How many people do you know who are always trying to prove themselves all the time? So the individuality can have both sides, okay? So it's for the spiritual path. Do we need to abandon individuality and surrender to spiritual authority? Or is there a positive side to individuality? Now, when Dzongsa Khyentse was teaching about individuality, this is what he said. He said, in these times, we land up misconceiving Buddha's teaching. Dukkha, or suffering, dukkha, is widely translated as suffering, but it's far more than this. He says, when we talk about dukkha, we talk about pain, old age, sickness, and all of that. He says, but it's so much more. He says, there's a big difference in terms of English. He says, individualism as a whole is a lump of suffering. So interesting. He says it's a lump of suffering. Human rights, he says, when people come these with their posters, these are my individual rights. I have a right to speak. I have a right to do this. He says they don't even know that it creates suffering. You got to debate this with me, because that's what he says. He says Dharma is not outdated, that individuality creates suffering. And yet, how do we keep the individuality? Because individuation has a different meaning, because individuation is to gradually actualize our own innate capacity to live as a unique individual, okay? But what may sometimes become confused is the distinction between the emergence of the ego identity and the process of self-realization. He says, Jung said, individuation is confused with ego coming into consciousness, and then ego is identified with the big self, because he said individuation is when you've got that big self, not the little self. And that big self he talked about as being an awakened kind of nature. And he says self is the archetype of wholeness. It gives us meaning to life, and it's unique and it's responsible. But he says individuality as such leads to us separating and isolating from others. We go, I, me, myself. This is what I want. These are mine. This is it. And we separate ourselves, whereas individuation gathers the world to yourself. The individual meets the universal, yet still retains uniqueness. Now, I want you to tell me your feelings about this, because Buddha gave this. I mean, Buddha didn't go on the usual path. He was a prince. He had a whole kingdom he could have inherited. But he chose as an individual to go out on his own and follow the path. Even if he was already enlightened, he did that to show us what we did. So he was definitely an individual. Then he sat down with these 5 people and then he left them, because he was definitely an individual. But he also taught about the emptiness of the ego. The ego is 5 skandhas: your form, your feelings, your perceptions, your habits, and your consciousness. And he said, these 5 are empty. But does that mean total abandonment of the 5 with no ego identity? Because Rob Priest says, if you have that, then you cast the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm throwing this open to you. Kathy, you smiling and doing it. Maybe we need, even the Dalai Lama said, we need a certain amount of ego to negotiate the hostile waters of our lives. But what is the difference between having a unique individuality? So if you listen to all the masters and their teachings, they each have a different style. They each have a different personality. They each have an individual way of putting it across. And that's great. I think people who, I've told them yesterday, I think people who teach Buddhism with a soft, quiet way, not like my, emphasis on things and my, finding examples and stories and everything. I admire people who talk very gently with a very few words. I think it's beautiful. But we each have our own style. Now, how far can we go with no clinging to self as a solid and permanent identity and cutting through the unhealthy aspects of yourself, okay? Because on the Bodhisattva path, you need a stable and mature self-identity. Just some of the places I've been to. When I went first to Sami Ling, and there you were in this great big, the first time I went there, Akong Rinpoche was giving a course. There were about 300 people attending the course. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know a soul. I was lost. Trust me, you needed a little bit of ego to find your way in that place and to find what you were going to do. Otherwise, you were just left by the wayside. And when I've been in India many, many times, there are so many times, I mean, nobody does anything for you. You sit in your own retreat room and you're left to your own devices. And I'm going to talk about the shadow that comes up. So how can you be an individual but not be ego grasping? Now, it's very interesting because James Lowe, when he talks about, he loves his guru, and he says, James Lowe says, when you meet someone you haven't met before, you ask things like, where are you from? What do you do? We get to know something about that person. He says you may be together with a person for years and still not know them in any way. You may not know them. He says a guru doesn't usually ask you questions about your life. We are talking about a different level of experience, not constructed out of stories, historical events, feelings. He says sometimes the guru can seem to be quite rude because he's not asking you questions about your life. He kind of has another story, and it's true, because how often do the gurus ask you about your life? I know Tasitu used to ask me a lot of questions about my life for one reason, because he was always interested in how Westerners function. So he would ask me a lot of questions about my life, but mostly these lamas don't ask us questions about our lives. They're not really interested whether you do this and you do that and whether you are this and whether you are that. They really, really aren't. They see into your nature. That's what they're looking at. Not in this little temporary drama, but how much of this individuality do we need? Viam, how much of the individuality do we need on this journey? Kathy, come on. I want to hear your voices.
Oh, there's a bit of an echo.
Oh, you know why? Because I've blooming kept the audio on there. It's off. Sorry. I meant to switch it off. Go.
So, Melanie, I have a self-saboteur. So that's definitely a big part of my shadow that comes up. Um, very, very often. And so that's like one part of what I wanted to say. But the other part is that
Go off that. How do you deal with your self-saboteur? So when you're doing something really good, you sabotage your efforts.
yes.
And how do you deal with that? Because we're going to talk about that.
That's a good question. I don't really know. I think I need to do some work on that. I mean, it was very strange today because I had my citizenship appointment and I went to the wrong place.
Oh, God. Okay.
Isn't it strange? I went to the wrong place. Everything was ready. I went to the wrong place. And then I was so stressed and I was so anxious. But then luckily I can return to my breath. So this is the other part I wanted to say is that I can return to my breath and I can be in my body and I can calm down. So I can be in that anxious, crazy state, but then I can also be in a peaceful state. And then my phone crashed. I mean, it was ridiculous. But luckily, I got in this bus and I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have my phone, but there were three people that were helping me. And there were these two people that came out of nowhere that were just very, very kind. And, it was just like so I think that when you're able to, this individuation that you're talking about, is that I feel like I'm working with it at the moment because I can be this human individual that sometimes can be absolutely chaotic, but then at the same time, I can take a deep breath and know that I'm breathing in and doing a lot more mindfulness and meditation practice. And then I can also send love to others out there and say, may you be happy. And then that fulfills me. And then I think like, oh, that feels much better. Because then I feel like I'm opening up and being more to others, because otherwise I just feel like I'm this complete chaotic wreck sometimes.
Yeah, but you know what? What you're saying, I want to, I'm going to do the shadow right now, okay?
Yeah.
And see if you can actually do that because most people find it extremely difficult to state like you have, oh, I've got a self-saboteur, That's wonderful because that's awareness. That's already half of the problem is gone. Once you know, it's mostly when you hide the shadow part that it becomes very, very difficult because then in unbelievable places it just crops up. But isn't it interesting that you were going to get your citizenship and you couldn't, you went to the wrong place?
I went to the wrong place, but I was able to attract help, and I'm always able to attract help. But can you have more than one? So, how many shadows are there? How deep is the shadow?
Whole stack, and we'll talk.
Yeah, I've got a whole lot.
You can have a whole lot, but what you're saying tonight is that when the shadow starts to try to take over your life, and we'll talk about how Buddha dealt with it and how other masters dealt with their shadow, when it starts to take over your life, as soon as you are able to go to that mindful, aware part of you, in other words, your absolute awakened nature, that already dissolves the effort of the shadow because you already know there's another part of you directing your life, going through your
Absolutely. And
life.
attracting help, attracting these people, because I really would have struggled to find this place. And these people came and they were so kind and so helpful, they were going to the same street.
Just amazing. And that's
Yeah.
exactly when you
Yeah.
let the director come in, it's absolutely amazing. Did you want to say something, Viam?
Hello, Mel, everybody. Good to see everyone.
Love.
There's so much there to unpack, but the three what you started with the three consciousness. I didn't get the exact term for the first one, but then what was the first one? and
The psyche, the human
the psyche,
psyche.
yeah. And then, yeah, the kind of the realm where we're living and interacting, and then the alaya consciousness, and then the primordial consciousness. And what comes up for me is my meditation practice life, and then living life after I've gotten off my cushion and starting email and calls and people and all of that, like two different dimensions. And I know there's I always hear about you want to bring with the cushion into life. Okay, oh, that's obviously the goal. Otherwise, it's just a relaxation. It's just like a chilling out session on my cushion. But what I feel like my meditation life has given me is the connection to the primordial consciousness, and a sense of like a deep faith, and resonating with what I hear in the teachings. So I feel like an expansive, and I feel like a very relaxedness about stuff like death, and those type of things, and like maybe things maybe lost in life, whatever it is, relationships or possessions, or like maybe more than people who don't practice. But and I'm not saying this is a judgment necessarily to myself, but it is a Buddhism is a path, it's a lifelong path. So when I discovered it until when I die, I know I'm on it. So um, the challenge is the living in life, and that stuff you're talking about, the shadow and the Elia consciousness, So I've got my set of things that I've been carrying with, from past lives, and so there's that, and then the Elia consciousness of everyone out there that you deal with, So what I'm so a scenario is
Hang on, because the Elia consciousness of everybody you deal with is your own creation. Remember
okay.
that. So
Okay.
that's a very important point on your story. Because if you see that, look, in my life, there's so many people giving me such a hard time, blah, 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 you've missed the point. Because
Yes.
the people that are there are your creation in order to resolve your memory chip, your karmic imprints and things. And always remember that. Sorry, I had to butt in because
Yes.
it's really important. Carry on.
No, that's perfect. So that's what I'm kind of feeling for me, because where I'm having some dots needs to get tied, or some bigger awareness of this type of thing, because I might say or do something with the best intentions. I tell myself, but maybe there's a bit of a sneakiness or a manipulativeness under the surface that I'm like, but I'm doing it because it's out of the goodness of my heart or whatever. But I actually have an agenda, maybe, maybe. But then it gets received, not in the way that but those type of things, where the kind of, and
No,
I would like that to be more just open, and not so many little things, and then sometimes I wonder, is it just me? Then I'm like, no, I think everyone is like that. Like, if and I have the awareness to see that, like what she was saying about the self-sabotaging. I think I can see it, and sometimes I'm like, I don't really like seeing that, but I think that is the beginning, because how else is it going to change it? If it's total unawareness, people are just going on and hurting each other most of the time, not even knowing they're offending people or whatever the case.
exactly. But the thing you're saying, just mute yourself so we don't get a change in the shift in the thing. You know what? But what you're saying is so important, because it's what I'm trying to give people every day in counseling, that when you are caught, and let's talk a little bit about the shadow, but when you are caught in the shadow's grip, that is the moment in which it is so important for you to have that connection with your primordial consciousness, with your Buddha nature. And if you can regularly keep yourself in touch with that Buddha nature, it really, really helps tremendously. Because as Kathy was saying, you're suddenly in this situation and you've sneaked to do this and you've sneaked to do that, even though you don't think it's good. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you've got something else directing your thing. Now, even when we were moving into a new house, and I think it's very traumatic when you move into a place, but all the time, I mean, my practice was non-negotiable in the morning, even though there was no real time to do it. But I thought, I have to make that connection with the Guru Yoga, with the things that I usually do, because otherwise I'm working from the human psyche. I'm not working from a much deeper level, which actually gets things done in it. Like Kathy said, people come and help, and people are there at the right time and the right whatever it is. And when you freak out in your psyche, it doesn't help anybody. But what I want to say is, it's very interesting because I don't know if you all heard of Ajahn Chah. He was, I think, he was Korean or whatever he was, but Jack Cornfield always writes about him, and Jack Cornfield writes a lot about the psychology, and he says he went to his monastery, and as he sat down on the floor, he looked for a place where there was a pillar behind him. He said he looked for a place because you'd have to sit for these long hours, and he said when everyone's eyes were closed, he leaned on the pillars, okay, just to give his back a little support. And after about 6 days during a Dharma talk, Ajahn Chah, looking in his direction, said, practice was to learn not to lean on things, but to learn how to lean on ourselves. So he would just give a little comment like that, which dealt with this thing. And he says there was this other American psychiatrist who came just as the retreat was beginning. It was the rainy season, so they don't go out. And he saw that the monks all chanted in the morning and chanted in the evening. So he came to Ajahn Chah and he said, I don't like chanting, and I'm not going to chant in the morning and the night. I came here to learn meditation practice, and I'm not going to chant with the monks. So it's so interesting what Ajahn Chah said. The day before he says, I don't want to chant, Ajahn Chah said, you don't want to chant, huh? He said to all the monks, if any of you, 100 of monks, doesn't want to chant, that's absolutely fine. But you, pointing to the psychiatrist, you will come morning and evening to chant. Otherwise, out with you. You get out and you go. He explained chanting as centering. So he had no choice. He had to leave or he had to chant. Now, was he really interested in whether this guy chanted? He was interested in taking his individuality. I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do that, and I don't enjoy this, and I don't enjoy that, and I'm picking to do this, and I'm picking, and he just made it straight. All of you can have a choice except you. So actually what he was doing was binding his shadow very, very quickly, which is very, very interesting. And he says, and Jack says, I was a hippie before, and now I had to submit to all the disciplines, black bowl, robe, etc. And he dreamt, he painted his bowl and dyed his robes. So Ajahn Chah, when he told him this dream, said, so that's what you call freedom, huh? He said, see if you can find something more fundamental to be free about. I love it, that, they challenged that shadow. But what is the shadow? A definition of the shadow. It's an accumulation. I want to do some meditation as well. It's an accumulation of the dark emotional life no longer acknowledged. So Kathy, yours is already acknowledged. So it isn't no longer acknowledged. It's not down. And thus not addressed or transformed. We often hide this when we're on a spiritual path. And we often create an outer persona of goodness. And this can split us and create shame, self-hatred, not feeling good enough. The Buddha nature is never tainted by the dark side. One moment of knowing this nature and all the negativity starts dissolving. You still take responsibility for the imprint that created the darkness, but we start realizing the truth about it and are grateful and compassionate. But when it comes to trauma, like rape and things like that. You have to be very careful to say to people, this is your responsibility, because that's not helpful to them. Sometimes it might be their responsibility, but sometimes it seems not to say that because it doesn't help them. But the Buddhist way is to purify the darkness with our practice at different levels for different folks, while focusing on pure, pristine awareness, which knows that none of it's tangible and it's not who we really are. So we focus on that. And it's very, very interesting because each of the levels of the Buddhist practice do it in a different way. The shadow must be faced, tamed, befriended, or even slain, as the case may be. No hidden agendas. In all the mythological stories, they talk about slaying the dragon. I think slaying is not hating the dragon, and it's cutting through that negativity, that has no tangibility. Now, when you take the story of Machik Logtron, who she wanted to get to that particular side of the ocean or of the river, and she arrives, and there's the demon. Everybody who came there faced this terrible dragon, okay, who said, you are not crossing this river by any manner of means, okay? So what she did was, of course, the dragon is us. It's not some outside force. It's always you yourself. So what she did was, she took herself, did the pour out of the body. So she actually left the body. And when we do the chur, I did the chur all the time in India, and it's the most amazing thing. Whenever there was a lot of darkness in my life, I used to practice. Well, I practiced it every day, but even when I came home, whenever there was a lot of darkness around me, I would practice that chur practice. Now, what happens is she sees herself as a dakini. She leaves her body and goes to the light. And then she takes her body with complete compassion, chops it up, makes a lovely fire, and puts her body into the pieces of her body into the fire. Then she makes a nectar, and then she feeds the demon with the nectar. She gives him a drink, and the demon is totally okay after that. And she can cross, and she's actually been able to feed the demon. So when you look, for example, Kathy, at the saboteur, the self-saboteur, you need to have real compassion. You need to say to that saboteur, what is it that you need from me? And then you're here. If you go and be the saboteur is going to say, I get really scared when you are making it. I'm much more comfortable when you are being rebellious and impossible. That's what your saboteur is going to say. So as soon as you are moving into a spiritual direction, I stopped because I'm very scared. Okay, now think about that. You need to really, she took that demon, whatever it was, she fed it. The Buddha, when he was right at the end of his enlightenment, Mara came, and Mara brought the sirens. What were the sirens? They were these beautiful, seductive women, okay, to try and tempt him off his path. So what he did was, he just turned the sirens into old hags. He wasn't remotely disturbed by the sirens. And when other demons came and threw arrows at him, he turned them into flowers. So you might all say, well, how did he do that? Easy, because they're all projections of your mind. So absolutely, they can't harm you if you change and you look at them in a different way. So Machik's demon just opened the way for her. So what I'm always thinking about so often in my life, because I've done this chur practice for a long time, and I did it in India, every time there were dark demons in me. And for me, every beginning of a retreat, I'm angry and I'm tired and I'm awful and terrible and revolting. Okay. And I know that as soon as it is, you know what it is. It's like there's no time for that part of you. So when you take yourself out, I'm too busy helping people and doing things. So whenever I come into retreat, those first few days are tears and anger and all kinds of things. And how do you do it? I'll tell you exactly how you deal with them. Because when Tupten told us when he went on his 4-year retreat, he said, Melanie was telling me about it. He said, I had an angry part of me that would have liked to kill everyone else in the retreat. He said, all the angers were in me at the beginning. He said, like a volcanic eruption. And he said, I was waiting for Akon Rinpoche to visit us. He said, so he visited them and he gave him 5 minutes. So the first thing Tupten said was, he said, Rinpoche, I'm so angry, I could have a volcanic eruption. He says, I would like to kill all the people around me. I'm so angry. So guess what Rinpoche said? Rinpoche said exactly to him, so let it be. He said, is that all you're going to tell me to do? Rinpoche, yes, said, that's all I'm going to tell you to do. Let your anger be. Allow it. Watch it. Don't touch it. Just allow it to express itself. And that is what we have to do with the dark side of ourselves, because it's really, really important. And the Buddha did that, even with the guy, the cousin that wanted to really murder him, he did that. But for all the things that we do, a mother phoned me the other day about her 19-year-old son, and she said, Melanie, he is struggling. And she said, there was this little boy in school, he and my son went together like this over everything. He said, and they used to fight and they used to be competitive and the one outdid the other and everything. She says, but now they're grown up, they're 19 years old, you know. And she says, this guy is starting to spread terrible rumors about my son. And do you think I can intervene on behalf of him? Do you think I can phone either his parents or him or anything? And I wrote back, absolutely not. I said, this other child is the shadow of your son in full force, and he needs to deal with it. If you intervene, you're going to make the biggest mistake of your life. He and this guy need to handle each other because they are the shadow side of each other. Interesting. I said, never intervene. If he doesn't resolve this, it will never, ever be resolved. So in Buddhism, and we're going to do a meditation, in Buddhism, you've got different ways of handling the dark side. In the Hinayana of Buddhism, the beginning, that early, when people come into the stage and they become monks very often and they have a clean life, all the negative things in your life are put away and they go and live in the mountains and everything, they actually try and stay away from all the negativity in that level. Okay, when they come to the Mahayana level, the next level, how they deal with the darkness is very interesting because the shadow is addressed with courage, compassion, and wisdom. When dark things arise, we use them as the path in the Mahayana and we try and transform them. So when, for instance, there's a lot of anger, we try and find a way to transform that anger through the practice by making it into love, or hatred into love, or whatever there is, you know, depression into joy. You using the practice to actually change it and make it into its opposite. That's in the Mahayana. But in the Vajrayana, the highest level of Buddhist practice, all the wild, potent, unruly instincts and passions are seen as manure. Manure, manure in your garden. You give it, it's made out of all the crap in the world, okay? It always stinks when people put manure into the garden. But it's the manure, your negative forces that are unruly and impossible are the manure from which certain enlightened qualities and powers arise. So we recognize the essential true nature of the shadow, the dark side, the saboteur, the person who freaks out at things, the anger, the shame, the self-conscious, all these sort of things are actually not true. If you look deeply, and you go to the highest level of Vajrayana, they transform on their own. You don't have to make hatred into love. They are the very nature. They always were pure. You've just perceived them as impure, and now they must be allowed to turn and become pure by themselves. That's very interesting. Think about it. All of you will do a meditation now. So, for example, Varupa, who was a very high master, the monastery saw him as dark because somebody looked through the window and he was doing all these rituals with alcohol. And then once he even sneaked a consort into his room. And so the whole monastery was up in arms and they said, "Get out of here. You are unruly, you are disgusting, you are drunk, you've got women and all these kind of things, you don't belong here." So he took all his things and he just walked through the wall, okay, because he was totally enlightened. And he never went through the door and everybody was watching him leave. So deliberately, he just walked through the wall and out. And as he walked through the wall, they all realized that he was enlightened. And then he went to this village and he started drinking alcohol, drinking lots of alcohol and things like that. And the woman said, "You haven't paid your debt." He said, "I'll pay my debt for the alcohol when the sun reaches that particular shadow in the sky." And guess what? He stopped the sun. So the sun never reached the shadow. So he never had to pay the debt. Because when you are enlightened, that's the manure, that's the thing that you are able to look right through and see the truth. And you stop feeling all these things of, "I'm so inadequate and I'll never be able to do this and I'll never be able to do that." Because those are normal. When I went to India and we didn't have permits, we were kicked out. All the Westerners were kicked out of Taisitu's monastery and everything. And I remember going into the car and like saying to the driver, the taxi, "Where must I go? Nobody's told me where to go. All my things are there. I've just got a little suitcase and I'm here for a long time. And where must I go?" And he said, "Well, let's try the Karmapa's monastery." So it just happened that there was one room left in the whole monastery that I happened to get. So I wanted to go and see the Karmapa. So one day, waiting quite a long time, I went before the Karmapa. And so I didn't know that if you asked certain questions and if you wanted to talk more, then he went and sat on a chair and you sat at his feet and you could ask all your things. So he stood there and all these guards were around him and everything. And then he said, "What would you want?" So what do I want? I just said, "Well, I've got to be here and I want you to clean me up." I don't know what made me say that, but I said, "I want you to clean me up." So he said, "Okay." And the interview, waiting hours and hours for him, was actually over. Okay, it was okay. And so I went into my room. I thought, you didn't say very much. Why didn't you ask a deep spiritual question? That's what came out of me. But when I went into my room, straight away, I was facing his room, and he started to work on me. And I was there for a couple of weeks, okay? And I just remember, I said yesterday to them, I was crying and crying and crying. If you ask me, what were you crying about? When I was finished crying and lying on the pillow like this, I'd get up and then I'd go, Melanie, what are you crying about? Okay, because I didn't know. I just, stuff came up probably from lifetimes, and I just cried and cried and cried. But when I eventually got back to Taisitu Rinpoche and he looked at me, he said, oh, now what is it that you want? So he could see that the mind had been cleaned out. That was a long time ago, so it's gone again, accumulating thing. But what I want to say is that it's really, really important that you are able to face this shadow side. It's really important, because if you don't, you just hide it and put on a spiritual facade, which is really not going to get you anywhere at any time. And what's important for all of you to understand is that the Nondra, the basic practice of Nondra, is the thing that cleans you out and brings the shadow out. So when you do the 4 mind changes, and then you do the refuge, the prostrations, I've told you, or when I did prostrations, when I did it for the whole Nondra thing, stuff used to come out of my skin. I could actually feel it coming out of my skin. It's a cleansing, it's a purifying, it's all of that. And when you do the Vajrasattva as well, when you do that 100-syllable mantras I've taught you through you, that's the 100 deities within you, the 100 qualities of the mandala of your heart. So these are the practices that are really designed for us to do so that we can clear ourselves, and then we've got a much higher channel to the Buddha nature. It's really, but I know, Viam, it's a lot of stuff, but you can go back. It's all recorded and you can go back to the previous ones. But I want you to really understand, because what I want to do next time, and next week we will have a session. We won't have the questions and answers because I've got to go away after that for 2 weeks. So I think that we'll have another session next week, because I want to do alchemy and I want to go into the dream work, because I think the dream work's so relevant. So I want to do a little bit of that. So we'll do that next time. But I want you to feel free. I'll stay afterwards, or even to text me with stuff that comes up for you. I'm really happy to help you do that, because I really think it's so important to your spiritual practice. So let's just do a little meditation anyway, so that you can just have time to ponder. Don't worry if you say, there's a lot for me to process. There's a lot. I know, Avril, you always say to me, there's a lot for me to process. Doesn't matter, because slowly, 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 tonight, I just wanted to tackle the individuality, which is lovely if you're unique, but not when it's ego grasping, and the individuation, which is allowing yourself to have your unique individuality, but to be much broader than the little ego. And the shadow, which comes up all the time, like often you're thinking, wonder why I got so angry with that person. And that's when that something is attacking from inside you, and you need to know these things. Once you know them, you can speak with them, you can give them compassion, you can do 2 chairs in which you become the saboteur, you become the shadow, and then you become yourself and you dialogue with it amazingly. And I'm very happy. If any of you have got any stuff you want to ask me, you're really welcome. I'll just do an audio back. So let's do a little bit of meditation. Now, your posture is very, very important, okay? Why is your posture important? Because the central channel is where all the energy comes in, and it's not this, and it's not that, and it's not dualistic. It is just is in the central channel. So in the beginning, when you really do have your lovely posture and you allow yourself to breathe in and breathe out, you're bringing all the energy into the central channel. And those of you, I know the Americans not in a time dimension, but those of you that are going to go to bed soon, this is a very good practice for you anyway before you go to bed. So you're breathing in a beautiful deep breath into your pure essence, blue, spacious, open, emptiness, which is full of possibility, pure, no agendas, no words, just absolutely being, open, possible, room for everything, from dark to light, all into the central channel, which is the non-dualistic channel. And as you breathe in, I want you to really unite with that beautiful, pure space, emptiness. We all need it. We need it in our busy lives. We need to remember it. We need to tune into it. We need to feel it, experience it, allow it. And as you breathe out in your deep breathing, I want you to let everything be. The day's events, the disappointments, the letdowns, the busyness, the not practice, everything, the anger, the lack of self-worth, the pushing of yourself to be able to compete. Just breathe everything out and allow it to be. It just goes back into the essence. But don't touch it. Don't go after it. Analyze it. Pick it up. Change it. Don't do anything. Just allow it completely to be. As soon as your mind goes and starts to try and pick it up, you just bring it back to the pure essence. And you allow everything to leave you completely. Don't touch it. Don't condemn yourself for it. Don't be annoyed if there's a lot of busyness. Just breathe it out into the essence. Everything comes out of the essence, Dharmakaya, and everything goes back into it all the time. Nothing is tangible. Nothing are you picking up, analyzing, using, deciding. Nothing. There's nothing to do, nothing to do, nothing to think about, and no answers, just to be in this moment. The past is gone. The present is changing all the time, and the future has not been made. So go to the fourth dimension of time, no time, pure, spacious, open. And practice this many times in the day. I'd rather you practice this for 5 minutes several times in the day, in your office, in your work, than that you did hours of meditation. Just a quick time to bring all the energy into the central channel and be in touch with that beautiful, pure, spacious essence, Dharmakaya. And for homework, I would really like you to, in your next contemplation meditation, just observe, don't condemn, what you keep repeating. You keep losing your temper, or you keep competing with people, or you sabotage things, or there are people you feel envious and jealous of for whatever reason. All the things that keep tripping you up. You always want to be the best, and you push yourself. All of those things. Your self-doubting, your introversion, your fear of speaking in case people criticize you, your criticism of yourself. Just ponder your most important shadow aspect. And once you have it, start dialoguing with it. Start talking to it, sharing. Put 2 chairs in the room, like we used to do with the inner child work. Put 2 chairs in the room. One you seated, the other your shadow. And then go and be the shadow, and then be you, and dialogue with each other. Change seats and listen carefully to whether that shadow is really afraid of you, afraid of things in life, frightened to be left behind. Whatever the real motivation, if you do that dialogue, you'll find it. And at the end, always end that dialogue with, I really understand what you feel. I never understood up to now, always condemned you, but I really understand what you feel. And I am here for you, listening and hearing. And with that, the whole shadow will absolutely dissolve. It's compassion. But she fed the dragon because she needed to cross over. Buddha fed the Maras because he needed to attain enlightenment. Feed that shadow, don't fight with it. Work on it. So let's just dedicate. For all sentient beings who are struggling in darkness, for all sentient beings who are blaming and shaming and feeling awful about everything in their lives, if they can get just a little bit of benefit out of this teaching, it'll be absolutely and totally wonderful. And let's just dedicate to all the peace processes, to all the wars coming to an end, to all the leaders whose shadows are just wanting their egos to control everybody, to get more land, to get more everything, more power. We really dedicate that may they get a little bit of merit and wake up to who they really are. So I'm just going to find the English of it. Through the virtue of this goodness, may we all obtain omniscience and overcome all adversity, thereupon liberating beings from the ocean of existence, which is rocked by the waves of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Sonam diye tamche zipane topne vidranam pamshene chegana chibala tropaye sipe sole doa warsho.